Hey everyone, welcome back to the final race recap of the season for Grid Chat. There was also a lot of moments of finality this weekend, which is hard and tough. And we have a lot to talk about, a lot to cry about, a lot to get emotional about. And who better than my pal Neha to do that with me? Please welcome Neha to the podcast.
Hello again. I'm so happy to be back. It's literally only been, 4 races since I was here last, and we went to a race together, and now here we are. Final race of the season.
Truly feels like it's been maybe a year since you were on the podcast due to the fact that we have done so much in between. We had a lot going on.
We really have.
Yeah. So,
in the best possible way, though.
All good stuff. Including, now that I think about it, I might as well get emotional right at the top of the episode. In Vegas, we were at that car that Lewis was so lovingly cradling today. We looked at that side pod.
We did look at the side pod.
Today is going to be an emotional episode because not only was the race good, not only did this season really deliver a end-to-end excitement level of who could take home the championship, this race was one of those as well where for a moment it really felt like we could. And honestly, it was emotional. We had so many people heading out, so many honestly kind of sad goodbyes, some devastating results. So we should get into it. We should chat about it. Heading into the race, the one thing I want to talk about is obviously we're coming in with this big emotional moment of Lewis Hamilton's final race with Mercedes, which is big. It's sad. It's been almost 30 years that he's been with the team since he started his junior career with them. We've seen teammates come and go. And also in a very sad way, this is also one of his teammates' last races in Formula One for this foreseeable future, unless he finds a way to come back with Valtteri. And this weekend just I thought this season was so great. I thought that this season was also the type of season that you can get someone into the sport with. There was so much excitement, so much going on, but also there's such an emotional level of this last race that if you maybe aren't as briefed on the history of Formula One, you don't get how much this hurts, you know?
Oh, for sure. I think this is one of those seasons, a 2016, a 2021, where it feels like so much happened, and in the best possible way. We had so many moments that you can just go look back on and be like, wow, those were either career defining or just very important for that driver or that team to accomplish. And yeah, overall, my goodness gracious, what a final race this was for every single person who is going to a new team, every single person who is leaving the sport, but also for McLaren and Ferrari. My goodness, I don't think anyone expected it to go that way. I think McLaren obviously had the upper hand going in, but wow, Ferrari really took it to them.
They really truly did. And also, I will be honest, this season, especially this last two, the end of last race coming into this race weekend, the amount of drama that we've had pop off at the very end, we got to talk about the situation between George and Max, because
we must.
For anyone who doesn't follow the press conferences, if you only watch the races, you have missed out on quite literally an entire movie's worth of drama. So
a true saga of just random events where you're how, if you don't just tell someone that George Russell and Max Verstappen are actively beefing with each other, people would be like, what do you mean? Because it just doesn't, if you just say that straight up, you're I don't understand the series of events, because the series of events are so choppy given when everything was said about the other person.
It's just my favorite thing about this whole thing, about all this whole drama saga, is that, like you're saying, out of context, if you changed the names and didn't say it was about Formula One, you would fully think we were talking about maybe high school girls, a sorority drama. It is really funny, the level that they came at each other. So anyone who doesn't follow it, last race we had George actively seek a penalty for Max for something that, depending on whose side you're on, was potentially not that big of a deal. It did not really cause danger, and it was also not impeding an actual fast lap. It was on both of them were on slow laps. Exactly. So ultimately they go into the stewards room at the behest of George really pushing this issue, something is said in the stewards room that makes Max very, very angry. When they come out, Max has received a single grid penalty as well as a penalty point on his license, and he has some strong words in the media to say about George being two-faced, not being the same type of person that he is on camera and off camera, and also that he's never seen anyone try to screw someone over as strongly as George did in the stewards room, which quite frankly, if there's not footage of that, I will lose my mind. I have to know what was said.
Apparently, I think the streets are saying that Netflix was in fact there, and if we don't get that footage, I'm going to be so mad because let's be real, like I like Drive to Survive, it better actually be good this season because they have stuff to work with. I
Yes.
I did not watch the last couple of seasons of Drive to Survive, but I will happily watch this one just because I want to see what they decide. Because if there is footage of this, that is the only concrete evidence we have. Otherwise, it's just like he said, complete
Right.
like we don't know what's actually real or not. And I hope there's footage because
There
there is
has to be.
Max saying there has to be. There's Max saying that George is two-faced. There's George saying that Max was screaming. There's Max saying that he wasn't screaming. And then it's like, who is correct? We will
And
never know. But
there's also George saying that Max like threatened to throw him into the wall head first. Like I
yeah.
need to know the truth, okay? Because
Yeah.
I will say my favorite thing was that last at the end of last weekend, Max was the one who was like really upset and pursuing it. Then you come
Mhm.
into this race weekend and George is giving interviews with tears in his eyes and
Yeah.
Max is sort of like what's your problem? Like what are we even talking about anymore? You've got Max obviously upset last week. Then George comes in this week and is melting down, tears in his eyes, level of pageantry I've not seen in a
Yeah.
long time. Then you have Max being asked about the fact that George was crying in an interview, tearing up, and Max
Mhm.
saying, next time I guess I'll bring the tissues. Like there's
Yeah.
like a complete flippant attitude. And then we
Yeah.
have the driver dinner. And the driver dinner is
Oh,
where
we
things
forgot the driver
really pop
dinner.
off. You cannot forget the
Yeah.
driver dinner.
Of
So,
course. And I love the driver dinner. There's this whole computer science problem about like the seating chart where there's like a million different permutations, especially with 20 drivers. There's a million different permutations that you can have of how to seat them at a table. But also with driver relationships, obviously, there are places where, like, probability wise, they're more likely to sit versus other places. The fact that the drivers strategically put two seats open at this table because George Russell was the last person to arrive, and both of those seats were next to Max Verstappen, and George Russell moved the seat after Max Verstappen greeted him next to Lewis Hamilton. It's theater, it's art, it's
it's so
beautiful.
good. My thing also is I'm like, someone told George the dinner was 15 minutes later than everybody else was told because there's no way that that many people arrive at a restaurant before you that are all settled
Also, George
down
Russell
and in
seems
on
like
the
a
joke.
very George
That's what I'm
Russell seems like
saying.
a very punctual human being where he would be the guy who's 10 minutes early to a
Right.
dinner. The fact that everyone was seated tells me that they were just like, we need to make this happen. And they made a driver's group chat without George in it. And
Without
they were like, listen, this is
they were
what's
like
happening. Everyone play along.
it's so funny, and my favorite part about it is that it like, people talk about Drive to Survive being, like, a more dramatized version of everything. This is obviously the most petty thing that you could ever do, but even better than that is that it's definitely true because it was spoken about on commentary twice, like, during qualifying and pre-qualifying show, like, they were discussing it, as though it was fact, and it's just so funny to me because I'm like, this is brilliant. This is exactly what I wanna hear that, like, guys who are getting paid millions of dollars to travel the world and drive cars are doing in their free time. They're strategizing on how to make a little dramatic moment.
I'm absolutely upset. It feels it's very high school, which is very funny because of just looking at the age ranges of these people. I mean, Fernando apparently was not at this dinner, but you have like
Mhm,
Lewis Hamilton, oldest driver at this dinner, going down to Liam, youngest driver at this
mhm.
dinner. But the people who are causing the drama are like the 26, 27-year olds.
Like the proper frat brothers. It was just it's so funny to me. And then you even
It's
have Lando
hilarious.
posting it on Instagram with the caption, "The two you're thinking about were seated as far away as possible." Like just genuinely so funny. And then, as you said, Max pulls a Peter Malark and announces that he's having a baby.
I love that it's called a Peter Malark. I love that we are bringing the Hunger Games into F1. This is like the perfect, like the combination of all of our interests from childhood are just like all being sandwiched together, and I'm obsessed with it. I I know people were asking about this on Twitter. They were like, "Do you think that he told everyone during dinner and then he was like, "Oh my gosh, none of these people can keep a secret. It's going to get out," and then revealed it? And I was like, I feel like that's 100% what it is because
Oh, that's
let's be
possible.
real.
Yeah.
No one can keep a secret in Formula 1 and we have seen that way too many times.
Yeah, I don't know, I was like I did see I heard that theory, I also heard that, like, the theory of them sort of, like, announcing it to push off the drama and change the narrative, which I don't think because I feel like Max doesn't really care, like, I don't feel like
Yeah.
Max would really care. I do think there was also a pretty, like, viral video of Kelly, like, kind of showing, and people were really
Mm,
speculating about her being pregnant, so I don't know if it was that too, that they just kind of wanted to, like, get ahead of the rumors.
sure.
Or if they just, they were happy and they wanted to announce the baby.
Yeah.
But
Well,
regardless,
congratulations to Max and
yeah,
Kelly.
yeah,
He I love how he called himself a bonus dad too. Like that was really adorable. I was like, because he was also there's so many videos of him and P just like in the
yeah.
paddock this weekend. And I'm like, this is just very wholesome content. And like Max has always kind of been, or like I feel like there was like a moment this season where he felt like a lot more like he was getting a lot more mature in a way where he was
Mhm.
talking about his future and like a life outside of Formula 1 and you were like, "Oh, this is an interesting shift." So I guess it all makes sense now.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, especially given she's at least, a few months along and
Yeah.
they've known for a bit. And I the thing that was just so funny about it to me was like you have George in these interviews talking about, their drama and how Max needs to be stood up to, whatever. And then the next day you have Max bounding into the paddock being asked about like, you know, "Are you excited to be a dad?" And he's like, "I mean, I'm kind of
Yeah.
already a bonus dad, but yes, I'm excited to have a baby." Like,
Yeah.
just the most wholesome, sweet, like, possible thing, and then you have another
Yeah.
driver being like, "He's a bully and we hate him," and it's just like, okay,
The
the
juxtaposition
timing is
is like
just so good.
crazy. Oh
Um,
my gosh.
but I loved that we came into the final season, kind of fists flying type of energy. It was always a good time.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think
as you said
everyone's also just tired. I think that is
agreed.
also a reality. This is the second triple header in a row. People are exhausted after the craziness of Vegas, followed by the craziness of Qatar. Like all of these things are just back to back to back. It's last day of school energy where everyone's just ready to be done for a couple
Yeah,
of months. And I'm
everybody's
really
got a little
happy everyone got their
senioritis.
closure. Yeah.
Yeah. So then we also have right before the race weekend starts, it's announced that Esteban Ocon will not be actually not right before the race weekend starts. It kind of started rumored at the end of last race weekend, like post
Mhm.
race, but confirmed Esteban will not be racing in Abu Dhabi in the last race of the season, which was I'm curious how you feel about this because at first I was like when we talked about this last week, I was like if this is something that Esteban's asked for so that he can participate in the Haas testing and that for some reason they're not able to manage like it seemed to me that he should have been able to be let out of his contract after this race to be able to test for Haas as other drivers are being allowed to do like Carlos will be testing for Williams. So it didn't make sense to me that it was him asking to be let out for the last race. And then ultimately we find out 100% he did not ask. And he had a special helmet ready. He had a planned trip to the factory to say goodbye to everybody. And then you have Alpine sort of just like not really acknowledge it. They put Jack in the seat. They even did their team photo with Jack instead of Esteban, which I thought was a little heartbreaking to see. And also Esteban's helmet had, the success that he's had with them on his helmet, like the helmet he intended to wear this weekend. You have Esteban as the most successful driver and the only driver to win a race for Alpine. Um, and it's sort of an unceremonious goodbye with no
I
real reasoning
completely agree.
attached. Yeah.
I I my heart broke for him because at first I was in the same place, was like, if he asked for this, then cool, but it's not like usually the whole thing is that it's a sponsor thing
Right.
where you can't wear a suit with the other team sponsors because contracts usually end December 31st of that calendar year. So if that was the case, then like that's a whole other story. But we've seen it for years where it's like drivers just wear a plain race suit and they go and do the test because that's helpful to the new team. And then the old team also gets some leeway for their new drivers, blah, blah, blah. This was weird. It
Yeah.
was, I mean, we've seen Alpine kind of make some interesting moves this season. Not even just this season, last season. It's been very interesting vibes. Their whole PR strategy, their whole just organization has
Mhm.
been turned on its head. This was an interesting move for them to make. My heart broke for Esteban. His helmet was so beautiful. He's been with this team for 5 years. He was there to the transition from Renault to Alpine. He won a race for them 2021, like been on the podium multiple times. It's it sucks. It's
Yeah.
very heartbreaking for him. And I do genuinely hope that Haas, the culture seems to have shifted so much. So I do
Mhm.
hope he kind of has a better landing there. I'm happy he's able to do the test for them because that is, if he wasn't able to do that, like after all of this, which
Yeah.
maybe Alpine would have gotten in the way of that too. I just don't like how the narrative just seems so blurred on Alpine's end. And
Mhm.
even though we know exactly what happened at this point.
Yeah. And it's also hard because I feel like earlier this season, Esteban really took the brunt of a lot of online hate, when it was pretty much figured out that he was gonna be leaving and before it was announced that he'd be going to Haas, post Monaco. And we saw
Yeah.
him receive so much negative press with really no backup from Alpine, and it got to the point that Esteban himself had to make a statement, which when he made that statement, I was like, "Oh, please don't do that. You're just gonna get more hate when you do." When, like, I was like, please someone take the phone away." But, like, for it to get to the point that a driver like this who's used to receiving that amount of hate is getting so upset that he's gonna make a public statement on Instagram about it, it's never a good sign, and so it was
Yeah.
frustrating because I felt like, especially with the way that they were ending the season, they had this double podium in Brazil together, they had these moments where it felt like, "Okay, we're ending on a nice note, we're ending with a large celebration," and I assumed they would
Mhm.
have done something for him to kind of close out the weekend.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's like the least you can do for a driver. I mean, Lewis has been with this team or with Mercedes for 12 years and he's getting
Mhm.
this like grand gesture. Esteban's been there for 5. That's a long
Yeah,
time. That's like the longest team that he's served with. He like again won a race with them. Not even getting to say goodbye to the team that he's worked with for so long
yeah,
is genuinely heartbreaking. And I feel like it also just like there's always a closure element, and I think that's a big thing in sports where especially when you're getting traded somewhere, if it's not like super abrupt in a lot
mhm,
of ways, then it's like, and if you've done a lot for this team, we've seen
yeah.
it with things like LeBron James and the Cavs, and having that moment of being like, you did so much for a franchise or an organization, and we want to thank you for that. Not having that is very unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree, and it also I think it sucks too because Esteban was there, he was at the team dinner, he's there so that he can test for Haas, and it's like it's just so devastating to watch that kind of stuff happen,
Mhm.
and I think there were a lot of devastating moments this week with people saying
Yeah.
goodbye and not getting really the goodbye that they hoped for. We also
Yeah.
have Valtteri saying that if he could go back 3 years, he made a mistake coming to this team, which is devastating, and
It's
also
very
you and I have talked about this a lot, but, like,
yeah.
to me, that moment where they replaced Valtteri with George was the moment that things started to splinter between Mercedes and Lewis, but also between Mercedes' perceived, sort of kind of brand of loyalty, brand of long-standing relationships, and obviously they're making this turn to focus on the future, but in focusing on the future, it does sort of feel like they did not necessarily honor their past, and I think that's been part of what's made this year so rocky, but I also think it started 3 years ago when Valtteri left, or
Yeah,
was
definitely.
was sent away, I suppose you could say.
I do think and I think it all even stems back to 2019 with Niki Lauda. Like, Niki
Yeah.
was the kind of basis of that team always, and George was even supposed to technically come in 2020 or
Mhm,
2021. He was only supposed to be at Williams for a season or 2, and
mhm,
the fact that he stayed for 3 was, like, longer than Toto has said that he wanted George to stay, more than George has said that he wanted to stay. So I think when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, there was this thing where it's like, obviously, you need to kind of keep the team going, but at the same time, you have a 7-time world champion on your team, and you weren't even willing, and he's been with the team for 12 years, and you weren't willing to give him a ambassador role for a
mhm,
team that he has literally cemented into the sport. And Valtteri was basically the perfect loyal soldier. Like, if Lewis was struggling, he was there to pick up the pieces. He was the
yep,
perfect number 2 driver, and he knew he was coming in as the number 2 driver, and he still did his job, no questions asked. And Lewis still to this day says that Valtteri was his favorite teammate, and I think that that's so whole. Even during the drivers' parade today, I think he
I
said that
know.
Valtteri, like, he had like a moment with Valtteri. My goodness, like, I Valtteri was top 5 driver for me when,
Yeah,
like, for a long time, and I'm gonna miss him. I think
yeah,
there's part of me that was like, it's cool to see him kind of come out of his shell after he went to Alfa Romeo, and now, which is now Stake, and it's not as, like, buttoned up as Mercedes
mhm.
was. So that was cool to see, like, a little bit more personality from him. But like, him leaving the sport in this way makes me really, really, really sad.
Yeah, it's like it feels I've been a really big Valtteri fan, and I was still this year. I was just constantly like, I just wish things would work out for you, you know what I mean? And with Lewis and him at every drivers parade that I was at, like they just go and they sit in the corner together, and like in Miami, actually I have a video of it because I was sitting where this happened, and Lewis, comes onto the driver's little train that they're on, and the two of
Mhm.
them do this thing every race now where they just go and stand in their own little corner at the very back. And Lewis has his one AirPod in, Valtteri's doing his little thing. Usually Valtteri gets on the train on the I keep wanting to call it a train. It's like a little
Cart?
cart that they put them in. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it's the
I
it's a
guess,
flatbed truck with no thing on it.
yeah.
Anyway, they
I've
put
just
them in
been
their
calling
little
it a
zoo cage.
wagon.
Oh, that's fair.
There's
Valtteri
Zuki.
literally, Valtteri gets in the zoo cage earlier and he usually goes and
Mhm.
stays in the back. And then Lewis
Him.
usually makes his way through all of the drivers at the end. And in Miami, he had an umbrella because of the sun. And he
Mhm.
was the only one who had that because, he's a diva. I love it. Who is this diva? So he like walks in with his little umbrella, and then you have him like he like taps Valtteri on the back and then turns around and goes to like, it's sort of just like an I'm here buddy. And then Valtteri turns around and sees him and taps him back. And then once they like kind of settle in, Lewis just tilts the umbrella so that the two of them can stand under it together, and they rode around.
My
And
heart.
I was just like, when I saw that in Miami, I was just like, oh, these guys had obviously, I do think, I'm sure their friendship got better when they weren't driving together, because there's a mental toll that comes from Valtteri having to like, constantly think about what would my career have been if I wasn't playing number 2 or if I wasn't sacrificing. Because ultimately, like, he did drive really well in Mercedes, and could have been a different driver if he wasn't driving with Lewis Hamilton. It's like the same
Okay.
way people talk about, like, I never won a championship, but if you think about it, like, there was a guy named Michael Jordan playing all of my seasons. Like, it just happens to be that way. And
Yeah.
so I'm sure their friendship is stronger now because they don't have that, and there's nothing in the way of it. But it's just so devastating to watch the two of them, which I think are like these icons of an era that's now ending for real. And
Mhm.
it's something about Valtteri leaving in the way that he's leaving on the same schedule, on the same day that Lewis ends his run with Mercedes, feels both poetic and depressing. And
Yeah.
I'm sad about it.
I'm very sad. Like, Mercedes was the team that brought me in to the sport in a very, like, full capacity. Lewis
Yeah.
was very instrumental in that as well. And when I think about it, I'm like, this feels weird. And I was telling you this.
Yeah.
This feels weird. It feels like my initial connection to the sport is ending. And obviously there are so many things that I love now that, like, I am so connected to in the sport. But that initial connection, that initial reason that I fell in love with Formula One, the fact that that is basically like done as of today, I shed many. Oh my gosh, I'm getting
Yeah.
emotional. It feels really emotional. It feels really
Yeah.
sad, and I'm like, wow, I can't. I guess I never thought we would be in this place
Yeah.
because Lewis and Mercedes just seemed synonymous with each other. It just what in my heart, in my head, I thought that Lewis would retire with Mercedes. And I think a lot of people also thought that as well. Obviously, I think I said this years ago. My like Formula One what if was always what if Lewis Hamilton went to Ferrari?
Mhm.
And now it's real.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes. But it's definitely, I think today, for both of us, an emotional day.
Emotional day. And then the last thing before we get into like actual couple moments from qualifying and then the race itself
Mhm. Yeah,
is I want to talk about the sticker that they put in Lewis's car that he asked to be removed. I don't know if you saw this.
I did.
Yeah. So in their goodbye stickers and livery inside the car, right in front of the camera, right in front of Lewis, like that he would be staring at, it says every team needs every dream needs a team.
Dream needs a team.
And I saw that and I was sort of like, okay. But then you hear Lewis say, you're going to have to take this sticker out of my car. And then you hear Nico comment on it and basically say, like, I would have liked to have seen something like every team needs a hero because it's supposed to be about celebrating Lewis. And
Mhm.
I honestly, that sticker, I was like, this sums up the botched season. It just sums up like this energy of not finding a way to make this goodbye tour about thanking Lewis for what he's done for Mercedes and trying to force it to be about what Mercedes has done for Lewis. And
Yeah.
the narrative is just, it's the wrong one to go with. I just don't understand where it comes from.
I genuinely it this whole season has perplexed me to no end because I mean, obviously the news kind of came as a shock before the season even started, but what do you mean this team that has won 8 championships with Lewis Hamilton, constructors championships, 7 drivers or 6 drivers championships with Lewis Hamilton has not done like everything that they can to thank him. They would
Yeah.
it does feel very, very odd, and I think there's also I think I saw somewhere, I hope I'm not making this up, but I saw someone post basically there was, like, a bunch of pitches on what this slogan should be, and
Hmm.
another organization had, like, pitched a different slogan, and they were
Hmm.
like, "When your pitch doesn't get chosen, and the one that did get chosen is getting utterly roasted on the internet,"
Yeah.
which is exactly what happened. The I think there was also someone who said that the reason that he wanted it removed was for visibility purposes,
Hmm.
but at the same time, the sentiment is wrong.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
sentiment is completely and I'm happy that Nico Rosberg, shout out Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton's number 1 fan this weekend, Nico Rosberg.
How far we've come. How far we
We've
have come.
literally friends to teammates to rivals to enemies to friends. Basically, I love to say anything but lovers, but it's
Yeah.
like literally we've come so far. And there's just something about that Lewis Nico dynamic that will always just make my heart really, really happy. And
Yeah.
hearing Nico just continue to sing Lewis's praises no matter what will always just like put a smile on my face, always and
It's
forever.
this weekend in particular with Nico's commentary and interviews and things that he was saying about Lewis were just like starts out with the sticker and then just ends with like him talking to Charles and being like, Lewis, the
Yeah.
greatest of all time, is about to be your teammate. I was like, I literally screamed when he said that. I was like already kind of
Yeah.
emotional, obviously, and it was
Yeah.
like 7 in the morning and I had been awake
Yeah.
since 5. But you have this clear admiration from Nico, which is like again, similarly to the not the same, obviously, because they have so much more history and so much more drama and everything like that, but like similarly to the Valtteri teammate situation where it's like
Yeah.
now that they have space, they can really come to respect each other.
When Nico obviously did the driver interviews, And it seemed like Lewis was also supposed to do a driver interview because Nico called over Terry Crews, and I was like, wait, I think he was like, wait, we're not doing this anymore. All right, see y'all next time. And I was like, oh, I guess one, if Lewis might have needed to be interviewed, but then they decided to scrap it because he was back in the garage. But they also very purposely didn't have Nico interviewing Lewis because I think it would have actually caused everyone to lose their minds collectively. But I like, I'm just thinking about like, what if Nico Rosberg, Lewis Hamilton's teammate when he came into Mercedes, was the one to interview Lewis Hamilton as he's leaving Mercedes? I think everyone would have spontaneously combusted all at once.
My my hot take is Lewis wouldn't have canceled the interview. What was interesting is, and I wonder if we'll see this like in some capacity outside of this race, but I was surprised that we didn't see Lewis do sort of like a sit down or like a they had like a little a Hamilton sign for him on at the end of the race instead of like a one, two,
Mhm.
three, but they didn't really do we just really saw like him taking pictures in the garage and we didn't really
Yeah.
see a big sit down anything. I wonder if he'll do a press conference or something like that.
I'm sure he will. But also, I think the reason, like my reasoning for it, because I wish he did that as well.
Yeah,
Um, my reasoning was like, he's not retiring.
true.
So he doesn't want to do as much fanfare. He's just going to a different team. And as much as he has like made an impact on Mercedes and all of like his accolades from this one team, he still has more to go. So he doesn't want like all of his achievements to be defined by his time at Mercedes, which is
Mhm.
how I was taking it, because otherwise I would have wanted all the content possible of him just talking about everything. Just
Yeah,
go. My hope was that he would have just like gone through, or this would have been insane behavior, gone through
yeah.
every single race that like meant a lot to him at this team and just like debriefed, because I would want to hear like there's so many like random strategic decisions that were made both
Mhm,
by like him and the team that like were very defining to his career, both positively and negatively. And
mhm.
yeah, I would have wanted to hear everything, but I'm sure he'll do that when he's like done
Actually
in the
retires. Yeah,
sport.
yeah, yeah.
But right now, it's like he still, in my brain, I'm like, he still has more to do. He has more races to win. He has his eighth championship that he needs to get, all of this stuff. So we have time, because
Yeah,
when he does retire, I think we will all be in shambles.
agreed, agreed. Yeah, I think there's gonna be, like, a really interesting I think next year is just gonna be really interesting. But before we
Yeah.
switch into that, we should talk about qualifying, the actual race, and then we
Yes.
can talk about our
Yes.
feelings about next year. Um,
Yes.
so heading into qualifying was a wild ride. I think a lot of unexpected moments happened. First and foremost, being my new enemy, the traffic cone bollard situation. If I see one,
Boo.
I'm gonna start hitting them on the street just for retribution. Like, what are you talking about? Get out of the way. Like,
What are you doing there?
you don't belong here and no one likes you. Because obviously, if you didn't watch qualifying, Lewis was knocked out in Q1 because he did his entire last lap with a bollard under the car. Also, his warm up, like half of his warm up lap, he had the same thing underneath it.
Yeah.
And so we see him get knocked out. Then we see obviously he's devastated by this, and we also see Toto
Mhm.
say, it was our bad, stupid mistake not
Yeah.
sending him out earlier. And when I
Yeah.
heard that, I was like, I mean, it's not the first time you made the mistake this season, though. So why do we keep making the mistake?
And it's very, yeah, I think it's always in hindsight, we should have done this, which
Right.
obviously hindsight's 2020, Toto Wolf. But at the
Like,
same time, I'm just, it seems to always be Lewis's bad luck, or it has been Lewis's bad luck this season. And mostly, or I don't think, I can't perfectly recall anything that has been like his fault solely.
yeah, yeah,
But I do think the team has messed up on multiple occasions with him, and I'm like, why is it always Lewis?
mhm,
And the one time, it's like one time I can recall was Spa, but like that's the one time George had some kind of issue. But like even then, George got to celebrate P1 on the podium. We didn't know that he
yeah,
was underweight, like all of these
yeah,
things. So in that way, I'm like, why always Lewis? But now, next season, it's like that
yeah.
is
Exactly.
now
Now
done and
it's over.
dusted.
It's like I
Yeah,
feel so
Lewis
much
has
better talking about it
ended.
now.
Yeah, Lewis has ended with more points over the last 3 years than George. he has
Yeah.
like won the teammate battle, let's call it that. Even though George has outqualified him, Lewis has been better in race situations. So
Yeah.
that's also a like fun way to end the thing, I
Yeah.
guess.
One thing about that I did wanna say that I actually was getting very frustrated with, the kind of commentary the last few weeks
Hmm.
about Lewis versus George and, like, this equivalence that they were starting to build, and also not even just an equivalence, but, like, almost saying that George has been outperforming him, because today we had a lot of commentary saying that, like, this has been George's year, and I was like, I don't know where that narrative is coming from because it's
Hmm.
not even that George had a bad year and Lewis had a bad year in Lewis standards, but Lewis and George won the same amount of races. We saw them, George continually outqualified Lewis. George also continually fell back to the point that Lewis was either next to him or in front of him.
Hmm.
You've got Lewis fighting from the back of the grid multiple times. You've had Lewis with upgrades that George didn't take on. You've had Lewis's seat break during a race and finish it. It was just this weird energy of saying that, like, George was so much better than him this year, and that there was like this was very much in the commentary right when Lewis was chasing George in the end, and
Hmm.
I just I sort of was like, I don't know where this narrative's coming from. It's the same narrative that came last week when they asked Fred, "Are you worried about Lewis's performance going into next year?" And Fred was like, "No, did you not watch last week where he was throwing fastest laps out just for like fun?" You know what I mean? He was throwing those fastest
Yeah.
laps out the way that most of us eat Pringles. Like, you can't stop. Once you have one, you
Yeah.
just can't stop. Like, I don't understand where this new narrative has come from of like Lewis is washed or George is so much better than Lewis, because just by the numbers, he's not. Like, it just doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense to me.
I yeah, I also I don't know where it's coming from. I don't understand. I get that people want to create some kind of drama or story of like, "Oh my gosh, he's a seven-time world champion who's losing to his much younger teammate."
Right.
That is a story, sure, but the story has no substance to it just
Right.
because of like literal facts, which is really funny when you look at it that way. You're like, "Oh, wow, like Lewis Hamilton is continuously like if George is outperforming in qualifying, that's great
Yeah.
because there's no points in qualifying, is there?
Right.
Lewis is the one who is gaining positions during the race and doing all of this stuff. I I just don't get it at all. Really don't. And I think it's also this thing of maybe they're trying to say like, "Oh yes, we're trying to compare George because he's going to be the leader next year uh with his now much younger teammate."
Hmm.
So trying to create that parallel that George Russell is the next Lewis at Mercedes, which is not something that you can ever really compare because right now there is only one Lewis Hamilton and he's still in the sport and he is going to the best or the most successful team on the grid. So for Lewis to go from one successful team to the next successful team, cool. Let's see how
Yeah.
it goes. But
Yeah.
you cannot compare apples to oranges or oranges to grapes or all of the fruits in the world. Like that's not how it
It's
works.
just not happening. Yeah.
And yeah. So yeah, very interesting narrative. I don't get it. I don't get it at all. And
Yeah.
I don't want to understand what's going on there.
What's going on? I will say honestly, and like I really do hope that they find a way to do this. George would be much better served by a narrative that is about the next generation of Mercedes, the
I
next
agree.
iteration of Mercedes,
Yeah.
and just leaving Lewis out of it. Like, I think the problem is, and George plays to this too, and I understand why he's trying to find a way around it mentally, but like everybody on sort of the Toto Wolff side, the Mercedes side, the press side, George,
Hmm.
everybody keeps bringing up Lewis in the comparison or
Hmm.
talking about George. George saying that he believes he's proven that he's better than Lewis. Like, there are these moments where you're sort of like you're just setting yourself up to get backlash that makes it you're if you want to compare yourself to someone, compare yourself to the best of you and keep
Hmm.
pushing and build this new era and say that, we've had there's a way to sort of like honor the glory that you've had. There would have been a really nice moment that they sort of tried to do, and then it fell apart because nobody actually feels this way, it feels like. But there was a way for George to come in and be like, when I was a kid, I was looking up to Lewis. I wanted to be just like
Hmm.
him. I continued to pursue
Hmm.
my career. You have the moment with this little autograph in the photo that he had on his helmet.
Yeah.
And all you had to do is just have him say, like, it was such an honor to get to drive with my hero and
Yeah.
to learn from him. And now he's
Yes.
leaving, and I'm going to do my best to usher in a new era of Mercedes, to bring Kimi in, to make this
Mhm.
brand continue on. And like that
Yes.
narrative would serve them so much better, because at that point it's just Lewis is moving on to his next thing. Mercedes is trying to find the next era that they can, what their team looks like after without Lewis, which no one
Mhm.
really wanted to acknowledge would one day happen, even if he retired there. Um,
Mhm.
and that's a narrative that like serves George in a way that is that I think would have kept a lot of fans at Mercedes. But
Oh,
because
yeah.
that was not the narrative that they went with, and the narrative they went with was, Lewis is old, Lewis has got to move on, Lewis is washed, George and Lewis are performing the same. Like when you go that narrative, then you lose a lot of hard-earned fans that are here for the history, that are here for Lewis in general. And if you would have just honored your history while moving into your new era, I don't know. Now I really want to know what the other marketing team's slogan was for the end of the
Yeah.
year.
No, me too. And like the thing is, both of those things can be true at the same time. And I think that they
Yeah,
went like very hard, like, we're gonna go this way and there's no other way to go about it. And that was to their detriment more than anything, which is
I agree.
very unfortunate. But yeah,
Yeah.
back to qualifying.
Yeah, back to qualifying. Last big moments from qualifying. We've got Valtteri making it all the way to Q3, which I was so happy
Shout
for him.
out Valtteri.
So good. You've got other big moments would be the Haas cars qualifying as high as they did, which was shocking, and amazing and fun.
I
And
thought Nico Hulkenberg was going to be on the podium today, and
yeah,
until like, or at least when qualifying happened, and then I saw that Nico was P3, I was like, oh my goodness, or P4, sorry.
yeah,
I was like, oh my goodness, is this the day that we get a Nico Hulkenberg podium? And then he got the grid drop, which was
yeah, got the grid drop.
unfortunate, but
Yes, very unfair.
still.
But very fun. I think and Kevin Magnussen, you have the very
Mhm.
sweet moment with his daughter putting his gloves on for the last time. I almost cried.
Oh,
I was
always. And then, like, her saying, like, "Drive good," or something like that, I
remember
was
to
like, "You're
drive well. I
joking.
was like
Remember to drive well." I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, this is the cutest thing in the world." Like, I'm obsessed. And, like, she, like, puts his, like, hand on her, and then she, like,
mhm.
goes to put, like, her hand on top, and I was like, "Stop it right now." Like, this child has
I'm gonna
grown up
start
in this
crying again.
paddock, and I know. Like, I love that, like, just, like, the whole family thing, and then, like, fast forward a little bit, his wife's radio message at the end of the race too, where it's like, "Welcome home to me and the girls." I was
Yeah,
like, "Stop it right now." Like, this is
unacceptable.
Formula 1 is a family show. It's a family show.
I loved that, and I'm excited to see Kevin in BMW
What?
next year. Yeah, it's gonna be really fun. Like I'm excited to see him drive for BMW. He seems to have a history with that team as well,
Yes, he
and
does.
I'm excited about that. So I'm
Apparently the
glad we know where
owner
he's going. Saved his
apparently
life.
the
Yeah.
owner saved him his life when he was 2, and I was like, "That's a crazy, like, wow, now he's driving for this team." I love this full circle moment.
Imagine if he had not saved him. You know what I mean? Like
I
it's
know.
just
We
so
would
great.
not have K-Met. Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that. I'm very excited about that. And then
Um,
we should move into the race, obviously.
yeah.
Uh, what a chaotic start.
Oh
Um,
my god.
I don't know about you,
I
but I started tearing up before we were on the formation lap because
oh, for
Franco's radio message, like, "Thank you for making my dreams come true." I literally was like, "Stop."
I was like I think there was a lot of things because I usually wake up early and I watch Grand Prix Sunday, which is
Mhm.
the Sky Sports coverage on ESPN, ahead of the race. And there was like lots of pieces that they were doing ahead of that. There was obviously like Franco's radio message. There was also like Stake did a guard of honor for Joe and Valtteri and in the like paddock, and I was like, this is adorable, and like they've been teammates for 3 years now. Like that's crazy. I'm so emotional about them both leaving. Then there's the end of Lewis's career at Mercedes, Carlos obviously leaving Ferrari for Will. There was so many storylines where I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this is truly not how I expected the season to go." And if you told me at the beginning of March that this is how it would end, I would not have believed anyone. And then we're also like, there's the anxiety of the title battle, but also less anxiety at some point. I think the anxiety increased during the race because at the
Agreed.
start, Charles is starting P19. and the 2 McLarens are 1-2. So you're
Yeah.
like, this is quite literally theirs to lose.
Yeah.
And they kind of almost did.
Yeah, which also, to be so fair to Oscar, not his fault. Like, did get
Not
hit
his
by
fault.
Max, spun around, and ultimately, well, also he did hit Franco, which I did not appreciate because that did ultimately lead to Franco DNFing, which really upset
Yeah.
me personally.
Oh,
Obviously
me
just
too.
a racing incident, but it was not great. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, Oscar gets spun around by Max. That's pretty much at that point he's gonna be done. Then he gets a 10-second
Mhm.
penalty. And continues to go through. So he did make it back into the points, which was very
He
impressive
did.
for him. Um,
Congratulations, Oscar.
Very proud. And then we have, obviously, like you said, the core of the race was the title battle, and that really, I thought there was something nice about the fact that it was Lando who brought it home
Yeah.
because of how much we've heard about, like, can he do this? Is he the one? And I think I
Yeah.
will say it sounds to me like and he said that he thought he was ready for a title battle and he was wrong for the drivers championship. And the
Mhm.
second that the drivers championship was off the table, he has locked right back in and
Oh, yeah.
performed really well. So I think it was nice to watch him just put in a very clean, good, strong race and lead the entire
Yeah.
time. I am curious how you felt about Charles' reaction to the end of the race because we have I was having flashbacks to last year as well,
Oh,
where you have Charles just like over the radio, pushing as hard as he can, asking where Carlos finished. Where did we
yeah.
finish? How do we get? And it's the
Yeah.
same thing both years where Carlos was the one who needed to work push a little harder to be able to win. You have Charles fight from P19 all the way up to P3, and all he needed was for Carlos to catch Lando, and he couldn't,
Yeah.
which is it's hard.
It's tough. It's very, very, very tough. And I feel for Charles especially because he put in the work. What
Yeah.
a freaking driver him was such a statement drive. I think that was his probably the most positions he's gained in a single race, P19 to P3.
Mhm.
He did exactly what he was supposed to do. Like even right after qualifying, I was spiraling. I was like, what can Ferrari do? And in my brain, I was like, please just like start him from the pit lane, give him a
Yeah.
brand new engine. Like, don't just replace the battery, replace everything that you possibly can. Like, they haven't done too many grid drops on that Ferrari. So cost cap wasn't really an issue, but just do everything possible to give him the car. And I'm happy that he had the car underneath him to be able to make that statement drive that he did.
Mhm.
But to miss out by this much,
Yeah.
I think Carlos had like a very like honestly a very lonely drive because there was
Mhm.
no one really challenging him for majority of the race, but he also wasn't able to keep up pace with Lando. Do
Yeah.
I think that if Charles was up there, he would have been able to challenge Lando? I do. I
Yeah.
definitely do. But at the same time, we're never going to know because that's not how the things played out. But data wise, he would have been very much on par. And I think that Charles put in a fabulous drive. I think he's rightfully pissed.
Yeah.
To see you could see the fire in his eyes, and I
Yeah.
think that that was really interesting to me because I was like, oh, he he definitely wanted this so badly. And you
Yeah.
could tell just like the way he was driving, he was making some crazy overtakes. My goodness, Charles Leclerc was putting on an absolute show. But then there was a moment after they had parked the cars. Charles was there drinking water. Lewis comes over. His
Mhm.
back is facing the camera. He like pats Charles, like they do like a little handshake moment. He pats Charles on the back, and then the camera cuts. Lewis
Oh, for sure.
said something, but I have like there was like two things where it's like there was the fire there where it was like
Yeah.
next year's our year.
Yeah.
And Ferrari I think lost this championship a long time ago,
Mhm.
aka Barcelona when they bought that horrible 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 upgrade. But the fact that they were right there even with that moment and
Mhm.
McLaren has been the consistent one, they're very much in it for next year and I'm really excited because now it's going to be Lewis and Charles
Yeah. I think
together.
also, like, that moment that you're talking about after the race, when I looked at it, I was like, "Oh, we are in for an era next year from the 2 of them," because both of
Oh
them
yeah.
right now are ending the season feeling like there was someone else on my team in my way. Like, and that it, I think sometimes that is what can be more of a fire than anything, because for Charles, he's
Yeah.
like, Carlos had a chance to bring it home 2 years in a row, and I did everything I
Didn't.
could,
Yeah.
and he didn't do it. Obviously, they've ended in a very tense moment in their relationship after Brazil, and they're not, leaving as, uh, the most friendly of teammates. And I think this was hard because, again, I was thinking back to last year on the radio, where you
Mhm.
have Charles shouting down the radio, "Where did we finish?" In the constructors, and being
Mhm.
told like we didn't get it
Yeah.
for second. And so it's just this flashback of like, okay, so you are watching your teammate, you're like, you just need someone to work with you, and you feel
Yeah.
like the team is working in a way that's working well. The car is finally working. They're going up and down. They've had so many moments. There's, you're this close, missed it by that much, and that much is
Mhm.
something you couldn't control. And then you have the
Yeah.
same with Lewis's whole season, just like the entire drama of it. And I think the
Yeah.
fire of those two boys, men, whatever, they're older than us, but like, I think the fire between the two of those men, and also the support of Fred, is going
Mhm.
to be a lethal combination next year.
I think so too. And I'm also just very, because obviously we know that they are very, like, Lewis and Charles definitely have a very good relationship from what
Mhm.
we've seen. And I do think that they, like, obviously having a good relationship off track might not necessarily translate to being teammates, but I do think that they have the same mindset in that they want that success. And Lewis
Yeah,
wants that success again, and Charles wants to bring that success to this team that is inherently his.
yeah,
And I think that that combination is going to be incredible, because also it's gonna, I think it's really gonna be them, and I think it's gonna end up being McLaren again. I think they are the two teams to look out for. And I
mhm,
think that we're gonna have, like, obviously Max is still gonna be up there. I think
yeah,
George is going to be up there too. I really think we have like a six-way battle for the drivers' championship. I'm like very confused by Mercedes' direction in their car right now, because they're very like their car performance is so variable depending on the track. And it seems like the McLarens and the Ferraris are those two cars that are performing favorably at every single circuit that they're going to, which is great for them. But that's what you need. You need that consistency throughout the season. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to fight for wins consistently. And uh Ferrari had 5 wins this season,
mhm.
and McLaren had 6. Is that, I think that's
That
right?
sounds right. I think you're correct.
So they're very close. And obviously, like,
Yeah,
Max was like Max, but
yeah,
in terms of the team win situation, you need to have both of the drivers up there. And that's one thing that Red Bull unfortunately lacked. So, oh yeah, speaking of that,
yep,
how do
that's the
we,
next one. Checo's
yeah.
DNF. Yeah, I
Good
think
segue. Great segue.
beautiful work. You should think about this. You should think about this as a career. I think Checo's DNF was this moment where I was like, come on, buddy. Like, everyone is really trying to find a way to tell you that you don't belong here anymore, and
Yeah.
you continue to like give them the ammunition. Like, it was hard to watch. It was hard to watch him spin out, beach himself, and just get out of the car and walk home. And
Yeah.
also, to the point that you have I don't know if you were watching on F1 TV or Sky Sports, but the commentary on F1 TV was literally like, this
Mm.
could be the last time we see Checo in a Red Bull racing suit. And I'm like, no one has said that that's what's happening, but we're so adamant because of the fact that he has been such a detriment to the team this year, that that's where
Yeah.
we're at.
Sky Sports, I watch Sky Sports, but they're very similar sentiment, where it was like,
Mhm.
who knows what's gonna happen? Like, it's probably like it might be the last time. It's like, I think everyone is in agreement that Checo hasn't pulled his weight this season, and that's
Yeah.
very, very clear. Of the top 4 teams, he's the only driver to not have a race win, where his teammate quite literally won the drivers' championship. So when you see it that way, you're like, okay, it's pretty clear cut. But at the
Mhm.
same time, we don't know the terms of the contract. We don't know what is going on behind the scenes at Red Bull.
Yeah.
And there has to be some reason, because Daniel was cut for less. Nick
Mhm.
was cut for less.
Mhm.
but those were also at different teams. So who
Yeah.
really knows? We really don't know what the inner workings are, and everyone can speculate that because that's what silly season is. We
Yeah.
speculate, we talk about this stuff, and it garners more attention than. But at the same time, we really don't know until there's a press release or a breaking news graphic on F1's Instagram what's actually true, and sometimes that's not even true. So
Yeah.
who
I would
knows?
say one thing that you said earlier that it was like your F1 what if used to be Lewis
Mhm,
going to Ferrari.
mhm.
My F1 what if recently has been what if Daniel never
Oh,
left
yeah.
Red Bull? Because this season has been so hard to watch. There's rumors that like Cadillac is going to talk to him about potentially being a driver and coming back again. And I don't know that I see Daniel putting himself through that. You know what I
I
mean?
don't think
Like
so.
we're just at a point where I feel like he's going to do something else. And right now he's
I think
living
so.
his sports influencer lifestyle, dashing all around the country, doing
I
his
know, just
thing.
going to, like, random Buffalo Bills bars in LA and going to
Like
games and tailgating in parking lots. I'm like, "Go off, Daniel."
yeah, like, have a good time, and you know what, like, I think he's earned his retirement from Formula 1. Hopefully, he finds somewhere else to drive, and there are rumors floating
Yes.
around that he'll get a seat in another series, but,
I'm sure
um
he will.
and I think what will be interesting, just to throw this out there, the current rumor is actually a Toyota seat, and that he'll be kind of bouncing between NASCAR and a Toyota series, which I'm like, "That could be cool." And I
Yeah.
kind of would love to see how America responds to him in a full-time America racing seat, you know what I mean? Like an
Oh,
American racing
for
series.
sure. I think Daniel in NASCAR would be a very, very good thing for NASCAR,
Agreed.
especially because it is so inherently American. Bringing in Daniel Ricciardo, who is also a NASCAR fan,
Yeah,
would be really good for the series as, like, from a fan perspective, but then also just, like, as a growth opportunity. And I know that he, like, has said that he doesn't like ovals, so IndyCar, I don't see him in an IndyCar seat anyway.
yeah.
NASCAR, I think he would do cool things in NASCAR for sure.
I also think he'd be, like you said, like a it's an expansion possibility for NASCAR in terms of
Mhm.
fan base, and I think it's an expansion possibility for them in terms of their own American fan base, because I think it's a
Yes.
certain part of America that is really big NASCAR fan
Yeah.
versus a Formula 1 fan. A lot of times you hear people talking about Formula 1 as like Americans talking about Formula 1 as something that they became a fan of because NASCAR and IndyCar didn't feel like a fit for them, and this is the first
Yeah.
series that they feel kind of welcome in. So I do think if you bring Daniel Ricciardo into a series like NASCAR that
Mhm.
is maybe struggling to reach a certain demographic of fans, you do sort of get a shortcut to potentially kind of signaling to those people this could be a series for you too. So there's something cool
Yeah.
about that. But I will say with the Checo situation, something that I've been like I can't stop myself from thinking about is if Daniel had been able to get past his ego about Max and he had stayed, would Red Bull have ever been stopped? Because the 2 of them are just if they would have stayed in that space and if Daniel would have essentially said, "Okay, I can be the number 2 driver," he had stayed at Red Bull. The car had stayed being, you know, consistent. They'd had Adrian Newey. They had everything that they've had for these last few seasons
Mhm.
since he's left. I really do wonder if there's a world where they ever got stopped.
I don't think so. I think
Yeah,
and also, like, the dynamic between Daniel and Max
yeah,
was already really good because, like, Daniel was the veteran, and then Max was, like, the kid who, like, progressed very quickly.
mhm,
Bringing in the Pierre, Alex, I think, like, obviously that has in a lot of ways shaped Formula 1 a lot to what we know today because,
mhm,
like, think about it, if Pierre didn't get the Red Bull opportunity, then Alex wouldn't have gotten the Red Bull opportunity, and then they
right.
wouldn't have brought in Checo. Like, it literally spiraled because basically Formula 1 today is because Daniel Ricciardo left Red Bull, and that
Yeah,
says so much that this one move shaped so much. I don't think they would have been stopped. Daniel showed that he was really, really good in last year's Red Bull. So, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I'm also a Daniel fan, so I can't
No, I
necessarily
agree.
just be like, yeah,
No,
I might be slightly biased.
but I think your point about, like, how much it's changed Formula 1 as we know it today
Mhm,
is so real because it's like, okay, you've got Pierre, you've got Alex Albon, you've got, Checo, obviously, but you also
mhm.
have, Oscar at at McLaren, which was a
Mhm.
landmark moment of them snatching him
Yeah.
up from Alpine, and the drama that's come from that. Um, yeah, so it's just if you look at like all of the holes that essentially have been punched in Formula 1 and also the stars that have come out of that. Like
Mhm.
you've got Pierre, you've got Oscar, you have
Mhm.
Alex, you have the face of Williams, you have the future of what it's gonna look like with Carlos and Alex next year. There are so many moments that would not have necessarily been formed the way that they were if Red Bull was
Mhm.
not trying to replace Daniel Ricciardo. And then
Yeah.
if Daniel had not failed in other teams, if he had not failed at McLaren, you wouldn't have Oscar. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting because it's like I do wonder had he stayed, do you get to the point that McLaren steals Oscar, or do you have a different driver at McLaren with Lando right now? Um, does does
I'd say
Alex
it's
end up with
different.
a yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I think so too.
I'd say I've thought about this a lot. I'm like, I genuinely think it would be like a Pato Award
Yeah.
driving alongside Lando Norris. I genuinely think that there might have been a world where Alex just stays in the Red Bull family. Because also, when you think about it, Sergio Perez would have never gotten the opportunity to move to Red Bull. So he would have
Mhm.
just lost the seat after Racing Point. All of these things would have just like, things would have happened, but it would have like completely changed the landscape. And you're like, wow, uh, Formula
Yeah.
One's so different. And I was also actually I was thinking about this a lot more because Will Buxton was reflecting on his 2025 predictions that he
Mm.
made during COVID.
Mhm.
And oh my gosh, it's hilarious because like there are drivers who you're like, oh, these people are nowhere near Formula One anymore. But you're like, I think he said that Lewis Hamilton retired. And I'm like, oh, like, look where we are now. Lewis Hamilton quite literally is moving to Ferrari, which is
Yeah.
like hilarious. It's funny when you think about that because again, hindsight's always 2020. We can speak to this now, but I genuinely think if Daniel stayed,
Mhm.
Red Bull I think could have been fighting for a champ or like would have started fighting more for the championship in 2020 and
Mhm.
then 2021 I think would have been like obviously Checo helped a lot in 2021
Mhm.
but I think Daniel would have done more and I don't think we would have had like that battle in Abu Dhabi because I think
Yeah.
that Max would have been helped out a little bit earlier. All of these things uh would have shaped this
Yeah.
season. Oh my gosh, I love thinking about this. It's like a fun thought experiment.
Yeah, no, it's good. And then it's also, like the last kind of full circle moment, which I talked about when he did leave, is that the last thing that he did was help Max in the drivers' championship. And I think that that's as much as people have feelings about two teams working together in that way and how much
Mhm.
VCARB is linked to Red Bull. I do still think that like from a story perspective, there's something really full circle
Yeah,
about that. And if we don't get our
definitely.
what if, at least we get our final moment together. But
Yes,
who
definitely.
knows?
Um, Also, we didn't really talk about Lewis's drive,
Yeah, we should.
P16 to P4.
Yeah,
Wow, I was emotional seeing him overtake all those people on an alternate strategy. Alternate strategies always scare me,
yeah.
but I'm glad they put him on an alternate strategy.
Lewis does like a hard tire, and he does perform well on a hard tire, and
Mhm.
I every time they put him on one, I'm like I get nervous, and then I'm like, "But you know
Yeah,
what? The man knows what he likes, just let him do his thing." And
yeah.
sometimes I have to catch myself being like, "This is a bad idea. This is not gonna go well." I'm like, which one of us is a seven-time world champion? Which one of us knows what we're talking about? It's definitely not
Yeah.
you watching from your couch under a blanket. Like, one of us knows what we're
It's
doing.
also, like, the thing is he complains about the tire too, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, Mercedes messed up again, putting him on this hard tire." And I'm like, "Oh no, we're gonna, like, go through this." But when they put him on, like, obviously went longer on the hard tire, switched him
Mhm.
onto the medium tire, which was generally performing well, and then Bono says the magic words, I sobbed. I
It's
cried
hammer
so many
time.
tears. It's hammer time. What Oh my gosh, that's the last time we were gonna hear that.
Yeah.
From Bono to Lewis. What a radio message. Strat 5.
Something yeah. I was really proud to watch that, because, honestly, after qualifying, it was one of those moments where you're like, "I just can't believe this is how it's gonna end," you know? It's just
Yeah.
such a awful situation, but then you
Yeah.
do have Lewis run through basically the entire grid, and then in the end of the race, you have him get through, and take 5th, and then he asks, "How far is the gap ahead?" and you have Bono very calmly tell
14
him 14 seconds, and
seconds.
then you have Lewis scream 14 seconds.
14 seconds.
And then in a moment that kind of did shock me, like I was taken aback, you hear Toto come over the radio and he says, "You can do that though." And I was surprised by it. I thought it was at least nice
Yeah.
to have a moment of reflection of the old days where you had Toto encouraging Lewis over the radio and you had
Mhm.
Toto sort of kind of pushing Lewis, and it was nice to see. Um, and then he did. He did do it. He did catch George and finish ahead and,
Yeah.
pass him one time, and you also heard, which I thought was interesting as well, you also heard Toto go over the radio and warn George not to do anything stupid, essentially. "Drive
Yes.
clean, do not," and it's like and George says,
Yeah.
"Of course," and it's like, "Okay,
Of
well,
course.
you know that there's been drama this season with that. Let's not be so casual
Y'all
about it."
have done some stuff before, so we're
Right.
just making sure that everything is good. I was like when I first heard that radio message, I was like, "Is he asking George to let Lewis pass?" But I was also like, "That would never happen." Like, I don't
Yeah.
think that they would call for team orders in that way.
Mm-mm.
Lewis's overtake, though, chef's kiss. I don't
Beautiful.
think George fought it as much, but I also think that's because he was on older tires and Lewis was
Mhm.
on the mediums while George was on the hards, so he had an easier time going past him. But what an overtake.
So
Lewis
beautiful.
Hamilton, P4. Oh my gosh. The
So, so
donuts.
good. Ugh,
The
which
donuts.
okay, here's the thing, I posted this on Threads too, and I'm really devastated because the one thing I wanted out of this ending at the end of this race was Valtteri and Lewis doing donuts together. I just felt like Valtteri deserved a goodbye, that I think he just got robbed of the last few years that weren't the right ending to his season, and it sucked because what happens, we have Valtteri DNF, and I was just genuinely devastated because we have the
Yeah.
radio of him being like, "This is just not how we want it to end," and obviously he didn't have a car to do donuts,
No.
so I was really sad, really, really bummed.
Yeah.
And it just feels unfair. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that changes. Like, I don't think there's a way where we see him come through. He's kind of openly said that he doesn't think he fits into the Red Bull equation, even though he thinks he can perform there. Um,
Yeah.
I think the way he said it is, "It doesn't really seem like they like me over there," or something along those lines. Um, so I don't know, but I mean, again, as we've said, like, if you're looking for a solid number 2 driver, Valtteri's your guy. Like, that is Valtteri and Max would be a fascinating thing to watch, I think.
Oh, definitely. They're, like, so different, but also kind of similar, and I think they have, like, I could see them having very similar humor is,
Yeah.
I think, what it is. But, yeah, Valtteri, that DNF, he now joins Jenson Button as one of the drivers who just holds a grid penalty and for his next race that he might not be running,
Yeah.
which is really funny to me because 'cause I'm like, "Okay, if he just, like, ever decides," or if, like, let's say George Russell, for whatever reason, is like, "I'm gonna run in the Indy 500," and it
Yeah.
just happens to conflict with a, F1 race weekend, and Valtteri does end up being the Mercedes reserve driver as the rumors are speculating,
Mhm.
then he's gonna have a 5 place grid drop regardless. So
Yeah. It's an interesting way to have to leave. I was sad for Franco
yeah.
for his DNF. I was sad for K-Mag for
Yes.
his DNF. Like, a
Yes.
lot of people who were on their way out also got their time cut short, and then obviously we
Yeah.
have Checo DNF as well. So it was a
Yeah.
rough end to the season,
It
even though it was an exciting
was.
one. So, yeah.
I Yeah, but we also didn't talk about McLaren really.
Yeah,
Congratulations, McLaren.
we absolutely should talk about
Sh
that.
yeah. I was like, "Oh, did we talk about this?" No, we didn't.
Yeah,
Congratulations, McLaren. You did the thing. We talked about their drives, but
yeah,
McLaren is now the constructors champion, which is amazing. They haven't done it since '98, which is
yeah,
before I was born, which is crazy.
yeah.
Um
And I think, like, also the thing, James last week did a really, like, when James was the guest on the podcast last week, and he
Yes.
did a really
Of
good
course I listen.
explanation of yeah, he did a really good explanation of what this would mean if they won, which they did end up doing, and, like,
Mhm.
I love the way that he said it, so I won't try to restate it, but
Yeah.
essentially just, like, the history of how long it's been, of how much that they have built that team back up, um
Yeah.
and also, there is something kind of cool about, like, when we talk about Lewis leaving a team and the next generation, like, this is what it looks like once you've once you lose kind of your stars and you start to rebuild
Mhm.
again. You've got Zach Brown, Andrea Stella, Lando Norris, and Oscar Piastri. And when you look at the history and the drama that has kind of brought them there, you've got originally it was Lando and Daniel, and Daniel gets replaced by Oscar in the drama of him being snatched up away from Alpine. And then
Mhm.
you have Andrea Stella coming in this year, and you just have the drama of this year not being managed
Yeah.
publicly very well. And also you have so much I actually there previously on this podcast we've said that Oscar will win a championship before Lando. And honestly, after today, I actually do think that Lando next year has it in him to show up and fight for one. And I don't know that he wins one next year because I think there are too many
Yeah.
factors to be able to say that. But I
Yeah.
do think that like next year is going to be a really big year for McLaren in general to determine which of these two drivers are their number one driver, because not determining that this year led to so many problems overall. And they did still win the Constructors Championship, but I think if they hadn't
Mhm.
had that debate for so long, I think they would
Mhm.
have won it earlier. I don't think it would have gone all the way to the end of the season.
I definitely agree. And I think that even going back before Lando Daniel, you had Lando Carlos, and that was
Mhm.
a change up from a lineup that was literally Jenson Button and Fernando Alonso. Like that
Yeah.
is, or sorry, there's
Sorry.
Jenson
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Button, Fernando Alonso, Stoffel Van Dorn, Fernando Alonso into Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris.
Mhm.
That whole progression, you can see that the team obviously very much shifted with Zach Brown coming in
Mhm.
and how they've like very deliberately put this trajectory in motion, and
Mhm.
they've done a really good job, and that is a testament to building a team up from literally nothing, because
Yeah.
McLaren was absolutely nowhere for a little bit there.
Yeah.
So very happy for them, good job to them, because even beginning of 2023 that was bad, and to that, and within two full seasons being
Mhm.
constructors championships, that's night and day. So
Yeah.
congratulations, McLaren. Like you have to hand it to them because they have like it's taken time, but
Mhm.
they've done the work and they've done an amazing job.
So something I'm curious about for you, because as you were talking about this, it gave me a little bit of like a little bit little brain blast, like something's itching at my
Mhm.
brain. You talked about the way that Zach has come in and built this team from sort of just like a bottomed period. And when you look at what they've done, they've come in and they've brought in younger drivers. They brought in Lando and Carlos, and then Carlos had it out and they brought in Daniel, who had a proven track record. And then we saw that Daniel didn't work out. And they went with a very young at the time rookie with Oscar.
Mhm.
And you went with Lando, who had sort of already kind of proven himself, but obviously wasn't at a championship level yet. And then if you look at what Toto's trying to do with Mercedes, he is following Zach's blueprint, which I think is kind of interesting because you have the same thing with Toto saying, okay, we've got this, like, we've got George, who's proven himself to be steady, but not a champion. And we've got a very promising young rookie that nobody was really thinking about coming out of nowhere and maybe too early and in a semi dramatic fashion of sort of being the reason why Lewis Hamilton leaves. Is this Mercedes and Toto trying to replicate the success that they're seeing from McLaren?
I think in a way, it's
Mhm.
hard to like again compare the two situations
Sure.
because the reality is slightly different in that you also have the legacy of a seven-time world champion that you are trying to replace, and there was always all the mess around that. But
Mhm.
it does seem like the general trend of the grid is go younger, and the only
Yeah.
team that has actively defied that this season is Ferrari by taking Lewis on and getting rid
Mhm.
of Carlos, which is also going to be interesting to see because yeah, like I said, the trend is getting like go for younger drivers.
Yeah.
They have a lot more like instinct, blah blah blah. But then you also cannot deny that Lewis Hamilton is a proven winner. So
Exactly.
it'll be I think next season will be fun to see,
Yeah.
okay, you have now Lando, Oscar's going will be going into his 3rd season. Lando will be going into his 7th season. Oh my god,
Mhm.
he's old.
Yeah.
And then George also in his 7th season. Kimi in his first, Lewis in his, I don't even want to count how many seasons Lewis has been in the sport. And then Charles on his 8th
Mhm.
season, 7th season with Ferrari. Like, he's been with that team, and you have Lewis coming in with just all the experience in the world versus like these just generally younger drivers. So it'll be fun to see how they like all of them stack up, because I think that technically Charles and Lewis will be the gold standard, but
Mhm.
obviously Oscar and Lando are very consistent in terms of like how they've performed as a teammate duo. So, and then you're just kind of throwing Kimmy in there to see like, okay, how are you going to do? And
Right.
if it is Max and Checo, or Max and someone else, or I don't know if Max is taking paternity leave, like he said at some point in time, like what is happening with Red Bull's lineup?
Oh,
We don't know.
yeah. Max did come out and say that he's not leaving.
Yeah.
Like, he was like, "I know the kid's gonna be fine when I'm gone," and,
Yeah.
like, he was like, "I don't really know where this came from. I'm finishing my
Yeah.
job." So I do think that that's funny, because there have been so many people saying that, like, "Oh, they're trying to replace Max's seat." I was like, "What do you?" I don't think so. I really
No.
think we would have known
Yeah.
that a long time ago.
I do
But
love
yeah.
using the phrase "max-ternity leave," though. I think that's really funny, and whoever came up with that, it was not me. I just wanna, like, applaud because I just keep
Just wanna say
laughing at
good
it.
job. I love that. For you, predictions for next year?
Ooh, I'm biased. I
Yeah.
might be wearing, so I'm wearing a McLaren shirt right now because
Mhm.
congratulations, McLaren, but I am biased. I will continue to be biased. I think Lewis Hamilton is gonna get his 8th next season, and I do think
Yep.
Ferrari will be Constructors' Championships, McLaren P2, Red Bull, depending on their driver lineup, it'll be Red Bull, Mercedes, or Mercedes, Red Bull.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think driver standings, it's going to be Lewis, Charles, Lando.
I feel you on that. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'm pretty in much in agreement with what you're saying, and again, always happen to be delusional, love my man, but I also don't even think it's delusional. I think there's gonna be
Yeah.
just an opening up of him returning to high
Yeah.
form, because he's being supported the way that he needs to be supported, and I think
Mhm.
him and Charles are going to have, I've been saying this for a while too, I think him and Charles are
Yeah.
gonna have a very good dynamic. I think Charles knows that Lewis being there is making the team better in terms of personnel, funding, and everything else, and I think also Lewis knows that when he wants to retire, he's going to receive what the respect that he wants. So I think
Yeah.
that this team is going to be really, really solid. I think Lando is going to be in the fight in a much different way than
Yes.
he was. And I think my hot take is that Lando is going to solidify himself as the number one at McLaren. And I don't know what that means for Oscar ultimately.
Yeah.
Does he leave?
Yeah.
Does he try to go somewhere else? Do we see him accept his number two role, which I don't know that we will, but I do think that that's going to be solidified next year.
With Mark Webber as his manager, I do not think that Oscar will ever accept that. So, but I do think it's going to be like a several driver fight for the drivers championship at least. And I do
Yeah.
think that like the usual suspects, aka Lewis, Charles, Lando, Oscar, George, and Max will definitely be firmly in the conversation once
Mhm.
again. Um, and I feel like now that Oscar has been in it for a little bit, I do think that there's going to be a little bit more like of a contentious nature between Lando and Oscar. And we already saw that a lot this season, but I
Mhm.
only think that Oscar is going to get faster.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to contribute to like a little bit more teammating.
Yeah. I
Yes.
agree. I think also lastly, we are gonna start to see safety cars again now that we have rookies in, like, this past season, we really did not have a lot of crashes. We did not have a lot of safety cars. I think we will next year. I think we've got too
Yes.
many newbies on the grid not for that to be the case. So,
The cars are also in a very stable place now. We've had
mhm.
these regulations for this will be the 4th season with these regulations. Before the new regulations, also teams are allowed to start working on their 2026 cars starting January 1st, 2025. I'm so excited. But that's the day I'm waiting for. I'm like, okay, January
Yeah.
1st, 2025, let's go. But for me, I'm thinking about this. I'm like, technically everyone should be in a really stable spot. It seems like some teams are in a better place than others. Obviously, Mercedes seems to be like very like woo, but
Mhm.
we're heading to like this plateau or like the stable state where we
Yeah.
were in 2021, and that is my favorite thing. So
Same. I'm so
next
excited.
season's going to be good.
It's
I
gonna be
think
a
we're going
good
to
one.
have one surprise race winner from outside the top 4 teams. I think it's going to be Williams.
Ooh, a hot take. Carlos doesn't feel that way. But before we go down that route, I think we should wrap it up. This was a really nice way to end the season. Thanks for spending it with me. And thanks to everyone who has listened this whole season. This has been an insane run. And I think we started out with everyone saying Max and Red Bull are going to win, and we'll see who else manages to have some fun down the grid. And gosh, what a turn. What a turn we have taken.
The biggest turn. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it made Formula One fun again. And I think
Mhm.
that is something that we have been like kind of craving, is that competition and all of that, the battling that we saw at the beginning of 2022 that
Mhm.
kind of faded at some point, but especially after amazing 2021 season. So I'm glad that's back. Multiple race winners, multiple time race winners,
Mhm.
which is so special and just makes, I think, viewing a lot more fun. And it's cool to be like, because obviously I think we were all in a place where like, oh, it's always fun to see like where everyone stacks up in the grid. Like
Right.
even battles for the podium are fun, like P2, P3. Battles for the win are also really, really fun
Yeah.
to watch.
Yeah, they're nice to have them back, and I think next year we're gonna have a lot. So I think this year has just been a really exciting reset, and, I'm happy that we got to spend some of it together in person and
Me
online,
too.
and I'm very, honestly happy that that everybody's, been a really fun community and had fun listening
Yes.
and running the races together. So I'm gonna end this podcast before I cry. I think
Yes.
I'm emotional. I think it's done. Happy
We did it.
2024. Yeah, happy end of the 2024 season. Congratulations to McLaren, and thanks for joining me, Neha. Always, if you don't want to watch these races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.